the middle of a big city with crores of people around us. We are gathered in full daylight with a lot of other friends around us. We are safe. We can now talk about scary things. It's safe to do that. So we are here. We have, in fact, a very broad panel today. So Rakesh Khanna is uh, founder of Laugh Publications, and I think I'd like to start by pointing out a book he's worked with. So this is called, very modestly, Ghosts, Monsters and Demons of India, which is a catalog of all kinds of spooky things from all across India. And we have Kiran Manral, who is, as all of us know, a genre-defying writer of horror as well as other things. We have a very broad spectrum to cover today, from folklore to horror to modern horror to genre in general. So we are glad you're all here. I think we should just start by asking the simple question first to both of you.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, myself, all right. Right, my name is Nissim. My name is P.S. Nissim. Fan of genre, fan of reading and writing, and I have one horror novel out, published with Laughed. It's in the bookshop. It's called Brown Boy.
And it's a very good one.
Thank you. And yes, so it's not about brown boys in America. It's not about Desi people. It's none of those. In fact, it's about a chicken-winged monster who haunts the hills of Sikkim. So it's not what you think it is. Right, thank you for that, Rakesh. And maybe we start with the simple question first. What do you think a monster is? We have written enough about them. We have a book titled that. Rakesh or Kiran, who will take it?
Rakesh first, he's researched it for 15 years.
What is a monster? I don't know. That's a tricky one. So we had some criteria we used of what to put in the book, but that was not just monsters. That was ghosts, monsters, and demons. We defined it using a union of 3 sets. So we said it was all like folkloric figures that are the ghosts of dead people, and all folkloric figures that are not the objects of worship. And I think what was the third one?
You want to refer to your book?
Yeah, I'll get back.
So
The mic close.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but I mean, it's tricky in India, right? Because there's a lot of there's not like a binary dualism like you have in the Western faiths. There's a lot of gray between gods that are worshipped, but they're worshipped to prevent them from doing really bad things to you, right? So you know, whether you call that a demon or a god sometimes is dicey.
Yeah, it's, I would think of folkloric horror as kind of the other side of the coin. Some of people my age or older will remember that Manoj Kumar movie about Pran singing patriotic songs during the day and singing about sad songs in the night. So in your day, you talk about your Ramayana and Mahabharata and awesome heroes who have, taught us good things. In the night, you huddle your children closer and talk about the things that are out there and are coming to get you, I guess. Right? But then you don't worship them. I think so. That's the key difference between the two. I think one time when we've spoken about this, I think someone pointed out Kantara. He says in a post-Kantara world, you can't distinguish between a god who is worshipped and a monster who is feared. So I think it's a very thin line. Kiran, what do you think about monsters? You have a broader palette, I think.
I think a monster is anything that you cannot understand. So something that...
My income taxes?
Absolutely, it's monstrous. Filing those papers, giving your returns, all your expenses sheets. I mean, those guys sitting out there, they're monsters. But having said that, it can be something supernatural. It can also be something or somebody completely human who is a monster. A monster is somebody who acts against your interests, somebody you cannot understand, somebody you are frightened of, or something you are frightened of for no explicable or inexplicable reason. And very often I think if monsters are understood, they might be like Beauty and the Beast, right? They're just misunderstood.
That's, if they're so terrible, if we hate our monsters so much, how come, Rakesh, there are so many of them in our folklore? Do we enjoy being scared, you think?
Yeah, definitely. I wonder about that. Like, I wondered about writing the book, whether maybe we have evolved a tendency to like have a huge catalog of bad guys in our head. Because if you think about it, like every religion has this, right? Either there's not only religions like modern cultures, there's Batman supervillains, there's Toho monsters in Japanese monster movies. There's the Lords of Xibalba in Central American mythology. Like, you've always got a bunch of bad guys, and they have names, and they have different weaknesses and origin stories. And I was wondering if maybe like back when there were more megafauna, right? Back when we had to worry about saber-toothed tigers and cave bears and lots of like large animals that could kill you, whether there's like a part of our brain that's like reserved for really scary, dangerous creatures. And like maybe now that there aren't, predators wandering around trying to eat us, we have to fill that space up with something.
Yeah, so that's a good thought. I think maybe it's a good time for you to segue into how you came up with this huge catalog of monsters, and maybe another question, like I can think of multiple purposes monsters serve. Warning people against bad things is one. Probably just explaining the consequences of bad actions. So there is a monster in there. I think it sounds like the symptoms of leprosy. I think you mentioned one. Let's talk about
Yeah, so I think with that book has a lot of things from tribal folklore from different pockets of India. And one thing I noticed reading those, a lot of older accounts, is that some of the demons would just be described as, this one gives you a fever for 3 days, and then you vomit, and there's rectal bleeding, and then you usually die. It's like there's not really much, they don't. Sometimes they have big yellow eyes or they float off the ground, but sometimes it's just descriptions of symptoms, right? And this is just the name that was given to a pox that was going around or something, right? And before you have the germ theory of disease, before you understand there's these microscopic bacteria and viruses that are causing things, like they had to give it some kind of name. And you even saw that during the pandemic, no? Like at least in Chennai, there were these murals of the coronavirus, and they gave rock fangs, like a lot of the time when they drew it, right?
Yeah, I was about to ask you whether the COVID monster would have come up by now, but it looks like it already has.
But the origin of the book, so I didn't grow up with this stuff. Like, I grew up in California, biracial family. Like, my mother is white from, they're like cowboys. Like, her family, like cowboy hats and boots and silver belt buckles and Old Town Road and all that stuff. And my father was Punjabi, like Multani, and then moved to Delhi. But like when he moved to the States, he didn't bring like a ton of Indian culture with him. Like we didn't have Hindi in the house. He brought like music and snacks. Like we listened to Mohammed Rafi and Mukesh and Shamshad Begum, and we ate a lot of pakoras and aloo paratha. But like other than that, we never went to temple. I didn't know much about Indian mythology. Actually, the first time that I learned anything about Indian mythology from my father was the conversation was sparked by Dungeons and Dragons. So I don't know, Dungeons and Dragons, I think I don't know how many Indians really were aware of it until about 10 years ago. But now I think since Stranger Things and that Hollywood movie that came, it's much more in the consciousness here. But in the 80s, growing up in California, it was a big deal. Like for geeky kids like me, it was a really big deal. And we all had these books. And one sort of formative book was the Monster Manual. So that came out in 1977, and it's by Gary Gygax. And he had collected like folkloric creatures from all over the world, like kappa and yokai from Japan, and kobolds from German folklore, plus a lot of like dinosaurs and giant ants and stuff like that, and made up things. If you saw the movie, gelatinous cubes and displacer beasts and all these things. And for each of those creatures, he kind of gave it, you would quantify them. He'd give them a number of hit points and an armor class, how much damage would it do if it hit you, and all this stuff. And there were only like 3 Indian mythological creatures in that book. There were Nagas and Yetis and Rakshasas. And the picture of the Rakshasa in that book is like, it's one really posh looking guy with like a silk smoking jacket and a tiger head. And that image, like even now, like if you look at Western video games, a lot of them have characters called Rakshasa who are like tiger men. It's like very different than the Indian conception of that monster. And I think it all comes from that illustration in that book. There was also another book in Dungeons and Dragons called Deities and Demigods. which I don't think they could have made that book today. It's like cultural appropriation on steroids. Like they just took whole pantheons of gods from all these different things and made them elements of the game, right? Assigned like strength and intelligence to all these deities and everything. So I think it was like reading that, and there's a Hindu mythology section, and they have Indra as the head of the pantheon. And my father was like objecting to that until, okay, maybe if they're going by old Rigvedic things, then it's okay. And then he saw like for Kali, they had her alignment as lawful evil, and that got him mad. Like he was upset by that. And then he's like, okay, I have to tell you some things. So, this was like my first instruction. But yeah, so I grew up loving monster manuals, and then when we started a publishing company, my wife and I started a publishing company in 2008. I moved to Chennai in 2000. I married a Tamil Christian, so she also didn't have a lot of Indian folklore in her upbringing. Thanks. One of the first books we did was Tamil pulp fiction, which are translations of Tamil crime and detective and horror and science fiction novels. And the translator we worked with on that was Preetham K. Chakravarti, who recommended a book of folklore by K. Rajanarayanan, who died 2 years ago. He's like this grand old man of Tamil folk tales, really amazing writer. And that book had a chapter of Pes and Pisases, which were a whole bunch of demons from all over Tamil Nadu, and many which I had never heard of before. Like by that time, I'd been living in India a while. I knew about yakshis and pisaches and stuff like that, but these were different. There's Jadamuni, and there's different kinds of Pes, and so I liked that chapter quite a bit. It was really fun to work on. And then at the same time, we were working with Sherry Changte on mesomyths. So we brought out a second edition recently of her mesomythology book. That has another whole pantheon of Lassi and the kind of hidden folk called Lassi and Kwavang and all kinds of creatures from Mizoram. And I was reading Kazi folklore and Kashmiri folklore and different things. So slowly, I was collecting.
That's pretty cool story. In fact, there's a word you use in this book called necrodiversity. There's hotspots where there are lots of monsters. And okay, I'll come back to that in a moment, but I think Kiran, I had just wanted to move on from that thought to, I think most of these are, I would say, although they have been evolving over time and these monsters have been around for a while, I think in your work you have stayed away from the traditional kind of ghosts, monsters and so on. Do you think that the audience today or people in cities, well, us, are kind of removed from the folk traditions? How close do you think that we are? When you write, do you think about folk traditions?
I have actually written about the traditional Chudail and the Yakshi, but they are in my short stories. They are not in my books. So I have mentioned them. I have dealt with them. I'm very fascinated by them, which is why I'm going to pick this book up. But yes, you do have a point that I haven't written about the traditional monsters or ghosts. It's more personal. It's more people who have passed away and coming back to haunt you. Are people in urban cities going away from traditional ghosts and demons and monsters? I think the storytelling tradition that came to us from our grandparents, from our elders, has somewhat dwindled. We don't have that anymore. We don't, the younger generation, I think it's very rare that they listen to these stories. When we grew up, we had Vikram or Vetal on our television. We had various kathai, which sort of introduced us to these monsters. We had Amar Chitrakatha, which also introduced us to these monsters. I think right now what content is being consumed is primarily Netflix and primarily very Western driven. You ask them about Percy Jackson and the gods of the Olympiad, all the Olympians, they will know. You ask them about the Titans, they will know. But even Norse gods, Norse mythology, because they've seen, Ragnarok and they've seen all those kind of things. Indian mythology, there is writing on it. There is a lot of mythological movies and all coming up. But the monsters, I think, somehow are getting relegated to the background. And maybe we're not being scared enough with them as children as we used to be, Bedtime tales like, ye bhoot aayega and this one will come and take you away. That's not happening anymore.
That's probably true. I think my grandmother used to scare us by talking about the Potli Wale Baba, the guy with the bag who would look into our window and, take us away if we were naughty. But I think now we live on the 12th floor. I don't think this is working for my son.
Yeah, and and we had the toilet gin,
Huh? Sorry?
the toilet gin.
Okay.
So,
Is he in your book?
I don't think so.
No?
I
Okay,
think we
you need
missed the
some-
toilet gin.
so that was my paternal grandmother because, the toilets were out of the house. And kids would get up in the middle of the night and say, okay, I need to go. And then they say, who would take this kid in the middle of the night? If you go in the night, there's a gin in the loo, and the gin is going to swallow you up whole. So that scared me for pretty much of my life. And I learned night times you just stayed in place.
That's terrifying.
No, I should probably just add a comment which I can't resist. Excuse me. I think probably the revenge of Indian culture on those Gary Gygax manuals where you had a Rakshasa with a suit and, a suave kind of guy. So I think when I was a kid, the Hindi comics were very popular in North India. And one of the series that was very popular was the Dracula series. It was like Dracula Ka Badla, Dracula Ka Revenge, and so on and so forth. In all these books, Dracula was rendered as a Rakshasa with spikes all over his body, black colored, blue fire out of his mouth, and with a crown and so on. And that was Dracula. So I felt always, so this is us taking revenge on all the guys who turned.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I wish you could get those now. But I think if you draw back a little bit further, Kiran, and you have written books which are not just horror, but across time travel. We were just talking about a book which is time travel. Do you think thinking in terms of the fantastic, do these genres kind of blend into each other easily? In your mind, do you see them as separate pieces? Do you think horror is a topic that's taken separately from sci-fi, let's say, or fantasy?
No, I think it all depends on the premise of your story. If you're going to start, putting things into boxes, then you might have a very bland story. So if your story is set in a specific time and space where the fantastical happens, then you bring the fantastical in. If that means scaring the pants of whoever's reading it, do it. You can't be saying that, okay, now this is a time travel book, therefore I can't scare anybody. But if the person is going back and forth in time because there's some scary experience that he or she has to relive, then the scary experience comes in. So it completely depends upon the premise of the story, I would think, Nissim. And you're an author too. You know how it is. When you sit down to write, you don't really think that, okay, I'm going to write in this genre. You just write the story at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's true. I think so. It comes down to what, as a human, you relate to. I think so. There are all different lenses to see the whole experience with. Speaking of which, Rakesh, I think so. Folklore. I think. Do you think that there are levels of folklore? There's some levels. So I don't know if you would want to blend mythology and folklore, for example. Right? You have consciously stayed away from mythology in this case, and you have consciously stayed away from social issues, except for one case which I will come back to. But let's go to the first question first.
Yeah, I mean, we actually got into this with the other book we published by Sherry Tsangte, Mesomyths. We called it Mesomyths, but some people even, her readers were saying, these are really folk tales, you can't call them myths. But I don't know, I mean, there's a gray line. I mean, the thing with a lot of those stories is that every Mizo person knows them. Like the story of Changten Larry is she's like this beautiful girl who gets visited in her dreams by the Lassi. So the Lassi are they're kind of like the elves of Mizoram. They're hidden folk. They show up, if they like you, they'll show up in your dreams, and for men, they'll show up in your dreams and bless you with good luck in hunting. But if they like you too much, they'll take you. So, so she gets abducted. Actually, they come to her brother and try to convince him to give her to the Lassi king in marriage. And finally, he gives her away in return for a gun and a basket full of ammunition.
Maybe I think to horribly mangle U.R. Ananthamurthy's quote, mythology is the front yard and folklore is the backyard of popular fiction, possibly.
Mythology is the
Like if you have a formal structure, there
mythology
books,
is the formal.
it's been documented, it's all proper, okay, then it's mythology, it's been around a while. Folklore is undocumented, informal, rapidly evolving, changing.
Right. So, I mean, I think, with Hindu mythology, that line is a little clearer, because there's there's Puranas and there's Upanishads. There's these books which are like, religious texts which tell this mythology. And then there's folk stories which are not in those books, which may be popular, but probably not everybody knows them. They're kind of local to this village or something like that. But when you go to like a place like Mizoram or like another tribal society like Kuruk or Ram mythology, everyone in that community will know those stories, but there's no book. You know what I mean? It's like it's widely known, and it's sort of part of the popular consciousness of like the metaphysics of the universe, kind of, right? Like the mythical universe. But there's no book. So do you call that a myth or a folktale? I don't know.
Have you had someone come up and disagree with you? Like, this is not how the story goes. The story is something else.
Not like angrily. Some people are like, yeah, I heard it this way, or my grandmother used to tell it like this. Yeah, those variations are always there.
Okay. Have you heard, going back to I think the toilet gin, have you had any other friends talk about the same thing?
That specific gin? No.
Okay.
I think that was invented by a very lazy grandmother. You had it. Same story. Brilliant. So it existed. She was not pulling a fast one on me.
Yeah, no. So it's not mythology. It's not folklore. It's mythology.
It's a grand. Okay. So that makes me a little relieved because I always thought she was conning me. So any other I have not heard of, but right now ma'am has said that she knows of this. But there are other stories, no? The Chudel who comes to you who you see in the middle of the road in the night and with her feet backwards, and if you speak to her kindly, she will take you with her. Or the one who has lost, who died in childbirth, who haunts the place. So my in-laws are from Almoda, from Kumau. So my mother-in-law is a depository of all the ghost stories and all the Dayans, Chudels, Bhutnis. And
that is a necrodiversity hotspot for sure. Kumau,
it is.
Kumau
Yeah.
is that got tons of ghosts.
So
There's lots of really interesting ones.
And in Face at the Window also, if you notice, there's a possession.
Right.
And that also comes from her telling me about these stories.
Okay, that's very cool. In fact, I think that's actually should probably bring me back to the section you spoke about. We mentioned earlier that folklore seems to serve a purpose. So that dying in childbirth could be either a warning or a kind of a prediction of misfortune for people. You know this happens, be careful, you'll follow our instructions, or else this will happen to you. Right? Do you think that all these, what do you think the purpose from an anthropological point of view, let's say, what is the point of those stories that you heard? What impact did they have on you? Were you just scared?
I don't think it's scared. I don't think it's a warning either. I think it's a way to familiarize ourselves with something that they find inexplicable. And to tell you that these things exist and these things are legitimate and you may be frightened of it, but they exist. And this is why it happens. And very often it's a story of revenge.
So it's a way of saying, don't oppress the powerless because they may come back.
They may come back, they may haunt you, they may make your life miserable. You may never be able to pass that road again because the ghosts of whoever you tormented will be there to harass you. It's also a way of telling us that, it's not going to end here. It doesn't end here. There is life beyond this particular body. And I think that continuum is something what frightens us and also fascinates us.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Chudel is an interesting one because, there's a lot of reports from missionaries or like dais, like people who came to India trying to convert people, who talk about, like in the West, ghosts are more commonly keep some of the personality that they had when they were alive. Like if they were, kind of fussy people when they were alive, they're fussy ghosts. If they're greedy people, they become greedy ghosts. But this used to surprise people that, like a pregnant woman could have been the sweetest person in the world, but she'll become the angriest ghost if she dies during childbirth. She'll become the most vengeful and the most evil one. And there's a lot of, I ran across a bunch of reports of missionaries who were saying the easiest people to convert were people who had seen the mutilation practices that used to happen when women died in childbirth because people were really scared that that would come back. This thing of backwards feet, according to some people, is that they used to break the ankles and twist them before burying the person so that she couldn't walk back. They used to take the corpse out of the house through the side door so they couldn't find the front. They used to throw mustard seed on the ground so that when the Chudel comes out of the grave, she has to count every mustard seed before she can pass onwards. And by the time she does that, the sun comes up and she has to go back in the grave. So I thought that was really interesting. Like it's been commented on by different people over centuries.
I mean, I would imagine that if some of the ghosts are related to the rituals, like the death, the post-mortem rituals, so to speak, there would be similarity as well between different cultures. I think you have mentioned a few kinds of ghosts, the same characteristics but totally different areas. Have you seen this as well?
Yeah, so one of them was from Kumaon. This was weird, and I have never seen anybody else mention this. So there's a guy in Kumaon called Aidi. He's a hunter ghost. He's supposed to be the ghost of a rich man who died on Shikar, and he was in what you call palanquin. Like he had these guys carrying him around in that. Yeah, how do you say it? Palki. I don't know how to say that word. So, and he had dogs with him, and beaters, like these guys who beat the bush so the animals will come out. But he has his eyes are on top of his head. Yeah, you've heard of this guy, yeah? And he spits venom. If his spit lands on you, you need like spiritual healing within 3 days or you'll die. This same character, and his arms are made out of metal. Like he's got weapons. He either carries weapons or his arms themselves are bows and arrows. And at his temple, you give him, like his temple has a big pile of metal bows that people give to this character. Metal bows. Yeah, metal bows. This same character is there in Malaysia, where he's called Hantu Pemburu. And he's the same guy. He's got eyes on top of his head. He's a hunter ghost. He comes at night. He's got this gang of people that comes with him. And he spits venom. Yeah, it's so weird. It's like, where's Kumaon and where's Malaysia? And there's no stories in between. So, I mean, I really wonder about that. Like, is that like one really adventurous storyteller, a really good storyteller who came from Kumaon to Malaysia or the other way? Like,
and then stop anywhere on the way.
Yeah. It's a long way, yeah. I would imagine, I'm speculating the migration, the bonded laborers that migrated from Bihar or Uttarakhand to,
But this is old. This is older than that. These come in this idea is talked about in like the first 1700s British anthropological books.
Pre-colonialism then. Okay, then
That one was weird. I don't understand that one.
Yeah. But I feel a lot of the horror that gets written nowadays, it's kind of, actually Kiran, I think you're the best person to talk about. Do you feel that the horror being written in India today, how does it feed off the folklore? I know you kind of feed off it, but you go off in your own direction quite a bit. Do you feel the landscape in general, what is your feeling? Does it get inspired by Indian folklore, by Western writing? What do you feel the roots of the current horror scene are today?
So we have Neil De Silva, who has written books which do take from Indian folklore. He has Yakshini, he has Maya's New Husband, which is about an Aghori Tantric. So he does take these elements. And then there is Chandrima Das, who had done urban myths. So those are not folklores, but those are more urban myths, very specifically Indian. About feeding from Western stories, I think most Indian writers are writing very Indian stories written in Indian context, but maybe they are urban contexts. More of the urban context rather, and I'm sorry I speak purely from the Indian writing in English that I have read. I'm sure regional languages and other mainstream languages do have a rich repository of folklore and monsters from folklore and mythology. But I find, yes, there is a lot of writing about the urban setting, urban ghosts, ghosts in the building, ghosts of the lift, ghost of a bad connection, that kind of a thing, vengeful spirits that come after a wronged murder, whatever. But somewhere along the line, some element of, you'll have a Yakshini or you'll have a Dakini or you'll have somebody come in, something, it'll be urban. But something,
some
the
folk
way to
religion.
get rid of that ghost will be very Indian. Even if that ghost is very, ritualistic, and even if the ghost is a commonplace garden variety, revengeful urban ghost.